For thousands of years, one woman has carried the blame for every hardship the world has ever known, every illness, every sorrow, every hard thing that has ever happened to anyone, anywhere, all of it traced back to a single moment of curiosity and a single name. But nobody ever stops to ask how she came to exist in the first place. She wasn't born the way you or I were born. She was built, piece by gods who knew exactly what they wanted her to do, long before she ever did it. This is the story of Pandora. You first have to understand what happened before she existed at all. There was a titan named Prometheus, clever and fiercely protective of the small, struggling creatures Zeus had recently made. Mortal men and women, cold and helpless, living in the dark without so much as a fire to warm their hands. Prometheus couldn't stand watching them suffer, so he did something no one expected. He stole fire from the gods themselves, hid a burning coal inside a hollow stalk of fennel, and carried it down to earth. Everything changed after that. Warmth and cooked food, tools. The first true beginnings of what we'd recognise as civilization, all made possible by something humanity was never supposed to have. Zeus's fury, when he found out, was the kind of fury that doesn't cool quickly. But here's the thing about Zeus. His anger was never simple. He didn't want a punishment that just hurt Prometheus. He wanted something slower, something that would reach every single mortal on Earth, generation after generation, forever. So he came up with an idea, and he called for Hephaestus. Picture the forge, heat rolling off it in waves, sparks catching the light, the constant ring of hammer against metal. Hephaestus worked there the way he worked at everything, with total focus. And this time Zeus had given him an unusual task: shape a woman out of clay and water. Not a statue, not a decoration. Something that would breathe and speak and walk and feel every bit as real as anyone born the ordinary way. But Hephaestus didn't build her alone. As she took shape on the forge floor, the other gods gathered, and one by one, each of them added something. Athena taught her to weave with hands more skilled than any mortal loom could match, and dressed her in a gown that seemed to hold its own light. Aphrodite touched her face and gave her a beauty so complete that anyone who looked at her felt something ache in their chest they couldn't quite name. The Graces hung jewellery around her throat and wrists, gold catching every angle of the forge light. And then came Hermes, messenger, trickster, the cleverest of all of them. And what he gave her you couldn't see at all. A mind built for cunning, a voice built for persuasion, the kind of charm that makes people say yes before they've even decided to. When she finally stood there, complete, breathing for the first time, Zeus gave her a name. Pandora. It means the gift of all, a nod to everything every god had poured into her. Say it out loud and it sounds like praise. But once you know what each of those gifts was actually built to do, it starts to sound like something else entirely. A warning maybe, or a threat dressed up as an honour. Prometheus knew Zeus too well to think this was over. The two of them were cousins. Prometheus belonged to the Titans, the older family of gods that had ruled before. Zeus and the Olympians rose up and took the throne from them. Different sides of the same bloodline, and after that war, hardly on speaking terms, it's exactly that history that let Prometheus see the trap coming before it ever arrived at anyone's door. So he went straight to his brother, Epimetheus, also a Titan, just as immortal, just as divine as Prometheus, but whose name, funnily enough, means afterthought. Tell me that doesn't say something about how this story ends before it's even begun. Prometheus warned him plainly. Whatever Zeus sends you, however harmless it looks, don't take it. It will not be what it seems. Epimetheus meant every word when he agreed. But then Pandora arrived at his door. Was this exactly as Prometheus had feared she would? And whatever resolve he'd been carrying simply didn't survive the moment he actually saw her. Imagine it. Aphrodite's beauty, Athena's craftsmanship, Hermes' honeyed voice all moving together at once, built specifically to overwhelm the exact kind of caution his brother had tried to give him. Despite everything he'd been told, despite some part of him almost certainly recognizing exactly what was happening, Epimetheus took her hand and made her his wife. It's worth sitting with that for a second because most tellings rush right past it. Epimetheus wasn't careless. He wasn't foolish. He was a titan, a being of real power and real judgment, not some easily fooled mortal. What stood in front of him wasn't built to be resisted by an ordinary man. It was built by the Olympians themselves, specifically so that no one, divine or otherwise, could turn it away. The trap didn't work because Epimetheus was weak. It worked because it was never designed to fail. She brought something else with her that day, besides herself. A jar, tall, heavy, the clay cool to the touch even in summer, its lid sealed shut with something that looked almost like wax, the kind of object that makes you want to know what's inside just by looking at it. The gods had given her one instruction along with it, and only one. Never, under any circumstances, open it. They didn't tell her what was inside, they just told her, in a tone that left absolutely no room for questions, that it had to stay closed for as long as she lived. For a while, life was good. Genuinely good. Pandora settled into the household with a warmth that felt entirely real because, in a lot of ways, it was her cunning and her cleverness sat quietly beneath the surface most days, rarely showing themselves at all. The neighbours adored her, charmed the same way Epimetheus had been, never quite noticing why. They left every conversation with her more taken with her than they'd expected to be. Meals were shared in the evenings, the way they are in any happy home. Laughter carrying out through open windows into the cooling night air. And the jar sat in the corner near the hearth, gathering dust, mostly forgotten in the ordinary rhythm of daily life, the kind of object you stop really seeing after a while, the way you stop noticing a painting that's hung on the same wall for years. Except Pandora never quite stopped noticing it. Curiosity had been built into her the same deliberate way her beauty had, and a mind shaped specifically for wanting to know things doesn't just switch off because it's been told not to look. Little by little, her eyes started finding their way back that corner of the room. She'd pause near it while doing something else entirely, a moment longer than she meant to spend there. She'd catch herself standing closer to it than she'd intended, her fingers grazing its cool surface before she'd even realised she'd crossed the room. It sat there, day after day, patient and silent, waiting for exactly the moment the gods had always known was coming. And then, one quiet afternoon, it happened. Epimetheus was out, gone since early morning, tending to something in the fields, the kind of ordinary errand that meant Pandora would have the whole house to herself for hours. The house was quiet in that particular way empty houses are. Every small sound suddenly noticeable. The creak of a floorboard, the low hum of insects outside the window, sunlight falling in a narrow gold band across the floor near the hearth, drifting slowly across the room as the afternoon wore on. Pandora found herself standing in front of the jar again, closer than she'd ever let herself stand before. She told herself she was only looking, the way she told herself that every single time before this one. Her hand rested on the lid before she'd fully decided to put it there. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she still remembered every word of the warning, remembered it clearly, the way you remember something you've turned over in your head 1,000 times. None of that stopped her hand from lifting the lid anyway, slowly, an inch at first, then further, some part of her almost daring herself to stop before it was too late. It was already too late. What came out of that jar happened all at once, and it happened fast, faster than she could track with her eyes. A grey haze poured upward out of the opening, thick and cold, splitting apart into shapes as it rose: sickness, grief, exhausting labour, envy, the slow ache of old age, every hardship the world had never once known before. That single moment, all of it rushing past her at once and out through the open window, the open door, seeping into the walls themselves as though the house could no longer hold it in. The room went cold in an instant, the particular cold of a door left open in the dead of winter. Pandora screamed and slammed the lid down with both hands, her whole body shaking. But by the time the lid struck home, almost everything that had ever been sealed inside was already gone. Loose in a world that would carry the weight of it forever after. Almost everything got out, not quite everything. Right at the very bottom of the jar, caught in that last instant before the lid finally came down, one thing never made it out at all. Hope. Elpis. In the old tongue, the very last thing left behind in a jar that, moments earlier, had been holding nothing but suffering, as though whoever packed it had saved the gentlest thing for last, tucked beneath everything heavier, closest to the bottom where it would be the last thing found and the last thing to escape. Think about what that actually means for a second. Every hardship that got loose that day scattered instantly and permanently, out into a world that would never fully shake any of it off again. Sickness would return again and again, grief would visit every household eventually, old age would come for everyone in time. But hope didn't scatter the way the rest of it did. Hope stayed exactly where it was, sealed away safe, kept whole and untouched by everything chaotic happening around it. It didn't go looking for anyone. It simply waited, patient and undiminished, in the one place it could always be found again whenever someone needed it badly enough to come looking. It's the one piece of this whole story that keeps it from being pure tragedy. Everything else the gods sealed away that day left the jar and never came back. Hope alone stayed close enough to still be reached, and life somehow went on. Pandora and Epimetheus stayed together, building a life in the same world she'd just changed forever. A harder world now, but not an empty one. In time they had a daughter. They named her Pyrrha, and she grew up in a household that had already survived the worst thing either of her parents would ever live through, carrying in her own way a little of what her mother had accidentally set loose and a little of the hope that had stayed behind to balance it. When Pyrrha came of age, she married a young man named Deucalion, son of Prometheus himself, the very titan who'd started this entire chain of events by stealing fire in the first place. Two brothers, once standing on opposite sides of the same warning, now joined together a generation later through their own children. Years after that, Zeus grew furious with humanity all over again. This time, convinced mortals had grown too wicked to be worth saving at all, and sent a flood to wash the world clean and start over completely. Of everyone alive, only 2 people survived it: Pyrrha and Deucalion, Pandora's own daughter, carrying forward the very bloodline the gods had once tried to use as a punishment, became instead the reason humanity continued at all. Together, she and her husband repopulated the entire Earth in the strangest way imaginable. Walking through the empty, flooded world, throwing stones over their shoulders one at a time, each one landing and rising up as a brand new person. Think about that for a moment. The woman blamed for every hardship the world has ever known became through her own daughter. The reason there was a world left to have hardships in at all. For thousands of years, and people have told this story as a warning about curiosity, about a woman who couldn't help herself and doomed the whole world because of it. But slow down and actually look at how her story begins, and you'll see something very different. Pandora never chose her own curiosity. She never chose her beauty or her charm, or the clever, persuasive mind Hermes built into her specifically so. She'd eventually fail the one instruction she was ever given. She was built deliberately by gods who knew exactly what she'd do long before she ever did it, handed to a household that never stood a real chance of turning her away, carrying a trap she never once asked to carry. It's the same shape as Medusa's story, if you think about it. A woman blamed for centuries, remembered as the danger rather than the target, while the ones who actually built the trap in the first place walk away without a scratch on their reputation, never once named as the ones truly responsible for what happened next. Zeus, who ordered her creation, Hephaestus, who shaped her hands to open exactly what she was told never to touch, Hermes, who gave her a mind built to eventually fail. None of them carry this story's blame the way she still does 3,000 years later. Maybe this was never really a story about curiosity at all. Maybe it's a story about what happens when someone is built, instead of born, to fail, and then spends thousands of years afterward taking the blame for doing exactly what she was made to do. If you enjoy stories like this one, subscribe to Mythology and Legends and turn on the notification bell so the next one finds you the moment it's ready. Which myth would you like told next? Leave it in the comments below. Thank you for listening to the tale of Pandora's box, and we'll see you again soon.